Today we're going to be speaking about the last book of the Yoga Sutras, the Kaivalya Pada. And I'd like to, today will be the last class in this series. And I'd like to invite you to, if you wish to put in the chat box. You can ask questions and any comments also. And I'm going to start with a little bit of discussion, but then I hope we have some questions that we could end our sessions together on that note. It's been a joy to be able to share this with you. And whenever you do a book study like this, you may have read, like I have, I've read the many books. We've done this for the autobiography of a yogi. We've done this for many other books. But in the Yoga Sutras, of course, I've read the Yoga Sutras before, but when you go over it and you start reading it again, and perhaps a little bit more closely, all sorts of new inspirations and ideas and perspectives come. And the same thing is here with the Yoga Sutras. And as I said, today I'd like to conclude with the discussion of this last book. Now, in a sense, I'm skipping through it rather quickly, but in my estimation, yes, you could spend much time on each of the sutras, but in a sense, much of what he's spoken about, Patanjali has spoken about in this Kaivalya chapter book, Pada, he's already mentioned. You could say he's summing it up already for which he's already said. And basically, it's expressed in that very word Kaivalya, which it could be translated loosely as release, or in the sense of liberation. Even you might even think of it that way. It's because it's the goal that all of what we have spoken about already. It's to take us to that point, but release from that bondage and release from identification with this Maya, this world of duality, and to be able to attain that state. Now, it's been a long journey. This is a soul's journey, and I think if we, I'm thinking it in terms of the conclusion. For me personally, as I was reading it, I thought, I didn't find it particularly as meaningful to me, because obviously it's a goal and that's what we want. And then in this last summation, this last book, this last chapter, he talks about the various aspects, particularly of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And that's a very inspiring topic, of course, but it's like somebody, and I've used this image before, somebody telling me about the Grand Canyon or somebody telling me about the Taj Mahal. I realized from the description they're absolutely beautiful or awe-inspiring places to go. But it gives me a certain sense of frustration to hear about those beautiful places, because I want to be there. I want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. And in a sense, the same thing when in talking about Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is a fascinating topic, I think it does have the one value in this to me, is that it inspires me to want to reach that point, to see the Taj Mahal, to go visit the Taj, to be the Taj Mahal, you might say, rather than just, and I think so much of life, it's the beautiful places, the things that we experience in life, we want to become that beauty. We want to experience that inwardly within itself. And so I think the value that I get of hearing about these very exalted states and reading about them, it gives me a certain hope, because so much of sometimes in life, sometimes in our states when we're not happy, we're a little bit depressed, we wonder, is there any meaning to life? I know that was an early thought of mine that drove me, you could say, to the spiritual path, was a sense of meaninglessness to life. I wanted, why is life? What is here? What is it about? And in a sense, in finding these spiritual teachings, not just the Yoga Sutras, but the autobiography of a yogi, the path of yoga, the beauty that could come from that. I think one of the inspirations that came from that was just the realization that there is something, that there is a direction to life, that there's meaning in life itself, and that as opposed to a thought that, well, oblivion, or there's not just an end in nothingness, there's an end in something beautiful and something meaningful. Sat Chit Ananda, ever new bliss, is the goal, in the sense of, and also the sense that the sufferings, the trials, the difficulties that we encounter in daily life, that they're behind all of that. There also is meaning. And there also is a release from that, and that's embodied in that word Kaivalya, the sense of release. Release from this ignorance that we find ourselves in. And we look about us in the world and we see so much ignorance in this world, but behind the scenes, we realize that that's not the reality. And so consequently, I think speaking about these high states can inspire us to that. It's something that we can attain, that is there for everybody. And I think the message, of course, of the Yoga Sutras is that this is a universal message. It's not sectarian. This is something that applies to every one of us, that is available for every one of us to be able to attain that state. And that state, you could say, is it's right now. It's just, God is with us right now. That divine bliss is with us right now. If we could only but realize it. Past, present, future, no more for me. And in reading that poem of Samadhi, read it, as Master said, again and again, and it gives you a bit of a taste. Not so much intellectually, but in the sense of feeling and inspiration. So it's helpful. I think it's helpful to know one's destination when one embarks on a journey. We take up the spiritual path and we wonder why. Overcome suffering, maybe, yes, but there's got to be more to it than just overcoming suffering. And it gives us a glimpse, which is what that poem Samadhi does, gives us a glimpse of some purpose for this creation, fulfillment, and it has meaning. And true, we may not understand it, but we have faith that understanding will come and understanding is possible. And I think, in a sense, Patanjali states these truths of yoga so matter-of-factly. He says, this is what you have to do. You do this, you do that, you overcome that, you overcome that. Yes, it may not be easy, but by just stating it matter-of-factly like that, we realize that we're not condemned to an eternal birth, rebirth, suffering again and again and again, that there is an end to suffering and the ability to attain divine bliss if we choose to find it. And so I've found, reading the Yoga Sutras, it inspires me to action. And that's what it's meant to be, because as we know, yoga is what can we do? As Swami used to always say, the three main philosophies of the Vedic tradition, or at least the tradition that we follow in self-realization, Sankhya philosophy, why we don't want to, why we need to, we're not going to find our happiness in this outer world. And then Vedanta, that high goal to which we are aspiring toward, which in a sense is what this Kaivalya is about. And then in between those two is the how. How do I get there? And that's what's always intrigued me about the Yoga Sutras. He spells it out, but gives us at the same time that vision. Now I want to read the last few slokas here toward the end of this Kaivalya Pada. Now, in the earlier parts and through the main body of this last Pada, he's talking about Nirvikalpa Samadhi and qualifying, giving some attributes to it, what it is, and how it applies. But then he says, in complete absence of self-interest, all afflictions and past karmas cease. And you could say that's the, now that is not necessarily the characteristic of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, because Nirvikalpa Samadhi is you could say, the attainment of transcendence of ego consciousness. And this is what, when one attains that state, as we've said before, one is classified as Jivan Mukta, a free soul while living. We're free of past karma. We're no longer bound or obligated in our actions because of past karma. But yet, it's not, and that's the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. When one attains, one becomes Jivan Mukta. But it's not that all karma has passed. We must immerse ourselves again and again in that lower state of Sabikalpa Samadhi. Again and again and again, we're washing ourselves of ego consciousness until we attain that state. But then, we must then be in that state, and it could take quite a long time, actually, to free ourselves, to dissolve back into eternity all of those karmic, you might say, obligations from the past, or those karmic tendencies from the past. Now, we no longer are bound, we're no longer creating new karma, but yet at the same time, that past karma is still there and once karma is put into motion, it has to resolve itself. And so that's, you could say, the soul's journey after that point. But yet, it's still in the state of bliss. And when that is attained, truly then we are free. And then that's the state of Kaivalya, when we truly have gone beyond that karma. And so this is what he's referring to: in complete absence of self-interest. Either we're in self right now, or self-interest that has been put into motion in the past. All afflictions and past karmas cease. Then all the coverings of ignorance and impurities are removed entirely. In this state of omniscience, what remains unknown through the senses becomes insignificant and negligible. At this point, the gunas cease to serve their purpose. They have been transcended. And you could say the gunas are like the waves of duality: good, better, and best, or bad, worse, and the worst. Relativity of all of the gunas imply that relativity, and so we transcend them. It's all one and the same. It's all bliss. The sequences of transformation end, and with that ending, time itself ceases to exist. And then Swami's comment on that is, time is only a product of the consciousness of change. When change ends, time itself ceases to be. And there again, I come back to that phrase in the poem Samadhi: past, future, past, present, future, no more for me. And then we're just in that state of timelessness at that point. And finally, at the end, he says, thus one attains the supreme state of freedom, which would be Kaivalya, when the gunas reabsorb themselves into Prakriti, having no more purpose for serving the Purusha. Or, to put it differently, the power of consciousness withdraws into its own nature. And in a sense, that's the end result of the process. And that ultimately is yoga, that union with the infinite. And it's that journey all of us at some point are on that journey. But I like that, refer back to what Master said. And Master said, oh, karma, karma, karma. Everybody complains about karma. He says, then don't you have him right now? When will I have God? People ask. You have him right now. It's simply a a process of knowing and realizing God is as close to us, and that state is as close to us right now as it ever will be. It's simply a matter of us removing those veils that separate us from that. And I find that personally, and this is perhaps why Master said we should memorize that poem, Samadhi. I find whenever I contemplate that, and it's a good meditation practice actually to think about that, to envision that state, that we have it right now, and that we're in that state right now. God is with us as close as it's ever going to be. Divine Mother's right there with us. If we could just but remove that self, praying to the Master, come out of the darkness and reveal thyself, reveal thyself. And we find that if you're in your meditation state, you find that you begin to kind of lose yourself into that if you make that the object of your meditation. So please, I want to ask you to submit any questions you might have, because in summation, this is what the goal of yoga is about. And I'm going to go to the questions here. What would be the main takeaway from this long class series? I think that's a good question. What should we take from this? I think one is to realize that freedom is possible. Freedom is attainable. Self-realization, all that we need to do, as Master said, is to improve our knowing, and that the ability to do that is in our hands. Divine grace plays its part, but divine grace is available to everybody. It's right there for all of us. We have to be able to turn, you might say the rain falls equally on all souls. Those who have their cups pointed upward can gather that rain for themselves. And so you could say that it puts, and I think the Yoga Sutras put the spiritual quest very firmly in our hands. It's not a matter of some are blessed and some are not blessed. All of us are blessed. And the obstacles are our obstacles that we have, you might say, created those obstacles, put them in, we've created our own karma, you might say. And to the fact that we've created our karma, and that the fact that we found ourselves in this situation, you could say, God, why, Master used to say, why did you create us and put us in this situation? It's your fault. He would say it was Divine Mother's fault, God's fault that we're here, because he created this universe. But then again, we've enmeshed ourselves in this. You could say we couldn't help ourselves in some way, but yet still that doesn't absolve us from the responsibility of our karma. And who created it, whether it's our fault or God's fault, doesn't really matter, because the task is the same. It's in our hands to relieve ourselves, to release ourselves from that. And I think that's the takeaway I would take, is it has inspired me to say, I can't, you look about life and you see problems. And how many people are looking for solutions? And you realize there comes a time when you can't just be looking for problems all the time without also at the same time looking for solutions. And that we have to be the ones. Nobody's going to free us but ourselves. And of course you could say, and now I'm qualifying that because I'm going to finish the other half of the sentence. Guru, through the grace of Guru and God's grace, is what frees us. But we have to be the one to turn our bowl upward to be able to receive that grace. And so consequently, you could say, is it ordained that we would be free from the very beginning? To some degree, God says that's so, the masters say that's so, but it could be a long time or a short time, and that's up to us. So in a sense, I take inspiration from Patanjali in that I can do something about it. Now, I've often taken this as an inspiration. ultimate freedom, I don't know. Truly, I said it's in our hands. I don't know that to be so. It could be Master's grace, it could be God's grace. All of these things come into play. But I do know that the ability to feel joy, the ability to feel peace, the ability to feel calm, I do know that that is in my hands to do. I can do that. I told this story right at the beginning of this whole series of that young man who asked me, what have I attained? I says, well, I don't think I've attained any powers, but I do have the power to be happy if I so choose. If I choose, because I've experienced that. I have the ability to be peaceful, to be calm. Now, maybe it's God's will is behind me, giving me that, helping me with that, but it sure seems like I'm making the choice. And as long as I'm in this ego consciousness, I have that sensation of I am choosing. Now, if that's the case, I know that I can choose to be happy or I can choose to be calm. Well, then why don't I exercise that? And I find that's the great obstacle is summoning up moment by moment to make that choice. We make it once in a while, but do we make it moment by moment? I don't, but I want to, and I know I'm capable of doing that if I so choose. And I think what the Master has said, he said, don't so much worry. Master said, don't so much worry about all the details of, this state of samadhi, that state of samadhi, all those things. He said, those things will come and reveal themselves in their own time. But get to the state, and this is what Swami Kriyananda used to tell those of us who had the blessing to know him. He said, make it your goal in this lifetime to reach the state of Jivan Mukta. That is attainable. Now, that doesn't mean getting, rid of all your karma. That maybe is not in the cards for us. But get to the point where you transcend your little ego. And I think Patanjali gives us the tools to be able to make that a realistic goal. And then Swamiji would say, once we've attained that, the rest is in God's hands, you might say. It doesn't matter. If we can go beyond, stop creating more karma, and then you'll find that freedom will eventually come in its own time, and it doesn't matter so much how long that takes. So I think I gained the inspiration for that, and I hope you have gained the inspiration. Now, just to bring it to a practical application also, Patanjali says the tools are available. Now, if you were to just read the Yoga Sutras, it would still leave you mystified of, well, what are those tools? Because he doesn't go into the details of these things. And I think that's why we need to take a step further than going beyond in the Yoga Sutras. It just says that they're available, there's something there, we can do something. But the actual what and how, now that's a matter of each individual has to tread their own spiritual path. My path took me to these teachings of Kriya Yoga. My path took me, my karma, my inspiration, my desire, my grace of Guru took me to the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda and the path of Kriya Yoga, because it gave me something to do. It has given me something to do on a day-to-day basis that I feel will free me. And I feel that tangibly and experientially, that I can say, this has worked for me and has helped me, made me, given me techniques. I was going to say little techniques, but it's not a little technique. Given me big techniques to be able to actually free myself from restlessness, which was the big obstacle when I began meditation, but it also gave me the tools to open my heart, to be able to do what Swami Sri Yukteswar says. We have to be able to open the heart, develop the heart's natural love. As a young man, I was very restless, and I was studious, and I was intellectual. And, as a student, you spend your whole young life as a student, and that's how I approach life. And I realized it's really through the heart and through the intuition that, for me, I had to develop that side of myself. But how? How to do it? I didn't know how. Kriya Yoga gave me those tools. And I think attunement with the Guru gave me those tools. And of course, I was fortunate to meet a direct disciple of through Swami Kriyananda of Paramhansa Yogananda. So these are the things that helped me and the takeaway. But the Yoga Sutras, I think reading them, say there are tools, this can be done. And it's a reassurance to that. It's an ancient tradition, and these are universal. It's not specific, it's not sectarian. These are universal principles. What do we call a state when body becomes absolutely still like rock and suddenly you feel that you're breathing after? Well, I don't know what you call that other than it's incipient going into breathlessness, because you will find that is a very pleasant state to go into and is attainable for all of us right now to be able to. As I mentioned, that I was very restless when I started meditating. I couldn't keep the body still, the body wasn't so bad. It was the mind and the emotional feelings. But you get to the point where your body you can hold your body still, not by force, but by relaxation and concentration upon something higher. Or you concentrate on the breath. The body will become very still. And the breath it will cease in time, but you'll begin to experience a long pauses when the breath, and eventually, if you go deeper into that state, it'll take you to the point where you begin to detach yourself from the body. So you're observing the body and it's not as if it's not yours. You can mentally look down at your body and you see it and you think, well, that's a body. It's not necessarily my body. You know, intellectually it's your body, but you're not attached to it anymore. It's a very pleasant state, but it's also a very useful state to be able to allow you to go deeper into your meditation at that time. I don't know it does have a name, and it eludes me at the moment. So I would have to be scholarly and look it up, but I don't, off the tip of my brain, I can't think of the name of that. Does having an experience of Sabhikalpa Samadhi make one a Jivan Mukta? No, it does not. Having that state of Sabhikalpa Samadhi is a beginning state. I hate to say it that way, but you see, we're infested with ego consciousness. And ego consciousness manifests itself as breath, and it manifests itself as attitudes. It manifests itself in many ways. And the releasing of ourselves from that ego consciousness is what we begin to do as we begin to interiorize ourselves and to go beyond this body consciousness. Remember what we've said a number of times. Ego is the soul's identification with the body and the personality that goes with that. So that identification is not savored easily, but it can be temporarily savored through our meditation practices, through our practices of Kriya, through inspiration that comes from grace. All of a sudden you're so inspired, and haven't you ever listened to really beautiful music and you realize, oh, your breath stopped. It was so beautiful. Anything inspiring uplifts you, and it takes you out of your breath for a little while. You're breathless. And there's even that phrase, oh, it left me breathless. Well, that's a temporary thing. Now, what we need to do is be able to, Sabhikalpa Samadhi is going into that state through grace, and then learning. And as you read the autobiography of a yogi, in my experience in cosmic consciousness, Master says through his guru's instruction, he learned how to dive into that state of samadhi at will. At first, it comes inspirationally, but you don't control it. Then, with a bit of practice, it comes and you learn to control that state. And then you have to dive deeply, or daily even, as St. Paul said, verily, verily, I die daily. And in other words, you go into that state of samadhi consciously until you get to the point where in other words, you're washing the laundry in the pure waters of bliss. Your laundry being your personality infested with the ego. It's eventually, with you wash it enough times in the pure waters, and eventually there's no soil left it becomes clean. So that takes time. That takes time. And how long is, you can't say. Everybody's different, but that's what we're aiming for. And when one attains that purity of the ego transcendence, that's what's known as nirvikalpa samadhi. There's no ego anymore. And when there's no ego, of course, there's no karma either created, new karma, because that's what creates new karma, the fact that we're attached. We have ego attachment, and we don't attach to our actions. We're free. So we don't leave any footprints, in other words. Now, that's beyond imagination. I mean, it's very hard to visualize that, and I think this is something all of us are trying to get to that point. What do we call, okay, what are the recognizable signs, if there are any? Well, I think you would, Master used to say this. Somebody would come to him and said, oh, I'm in a state of, some exalted state. And he said, is that person, but yet they were huffing and puffing. He said, one state is gone totally beyond the breath. There's no breath. And it's completely still. And you would also say, ultimately, the heart stops as well. So one is able to leave the body at will. So that you could say is a physical state, but really, which is you can demonstrate from outside. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean one has attained nirvikalpa samadhi, but it is certainly an evidence of a very high state of transcendence of body consciousness to be able to do that. But it could just be a savikalpa state, but eventually, of course, we have to. And there's no. How does one measure ego consciousness? I can't quite cognize that right now, but we have to definitely be able to transcend body consciousness. Okay. Do you think we should go deeper personally into these sutras, or perhaps stick more to the Gita and other of Master's books? Well, that's a good question. I think you should be led by your inspiration. I think that inspiration interestingly, there's something that Yogananda said to his disciples. When they became a disciple, he would tell them to not read anything for the first year in the ashram there, the hermitage. Don't read any other books but his in that first year. And the reason is because a person gets distracted into, not that they're good books or bad books, or other books are, they take one's mind in other directions. He says, first immerse yourself in the Guru's books and teachings if you're new on the path. Now that, of course, as time goes by, you begin to realize that there's inspiration in many different things. So in a sense, I would say the same thing is first go into Master's books. Read all of his books as much as you can, all of his lessons as much as you can, and read then read the books of his disciples, Swami Kriyananda in particular, in our tradition. But there are others as well about him. And then from that, you then begin to expand your repertoire. Now, if it depends on what you do in your life. There's no necessity to go further than that. But if you're in a situation where you're sharing Yogananda's teachings or these teachings in general, you can see things from other perspectives. And so the Yoga Sutras and all of the traditional scriptures are helpful things to study. Not required reading by any means, but if you find inspiration and help from them. So in these sutras, it's good to know some of them. But definitely would start with Yogananda's teachings. And of course, the Gita is so central to our tradition that I think it would be more appropriate to start with the Gita before going to the Yoga Sutras. But there are things in the Yoga Sutras like, Yoga Chitta Vritti Narod, everybody knows that. To understand and meditate on something so essential as that. The yamas and the niyamas, as we've spoken about, we teach those in our introductory classes. It's good to have some knowledge of that. But honestly, if I had to choose, I would choose Master's teachings in the Gita before I chose the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras are a little bit more studious for the studious student. I wouldn't say it's a requirement by any means, but if your interest is there, certainly it can be helpful. It can be helpful. And okay, and I see no more questions, but anyway, I appreciate all of your participation in this class series. We're going to do, I was speaking with Bar Akil right before we came on and thinking, what do we do next? And always your suggestions. And we're going to take a break in the coming weeks. And then from here, we'll move on to the next a study of some other topic. And if you have suggestions, please send them to Bar Akil, and you can send them to me. And I want you to know you can always send your questions to me directly if you have them. Jaya, Jaya, at anandaindia.org. You are welcome. And I appreciate any comments that you might have. So, okay, I'm going to leave it at, there it is. Somebody wrote it right there. So thank you again, all of you, and may Master be with you and bless you in all that you do. And until we come back again for our next book study, I bid you farewell. And again, thank you, and be joy be with you at all times. Joy to you.